I must share it with you that while I was the Chief Justice in Punjab and Haryana High Court at Chandigarh, in one of the functions that we organized, at one given point of time, we inaugurated as many as 17 centers all over the two states of Punjab and Haryana in different district headquarters. Centers which had adequate facilities in terms of accommodation, furniture, including computers and all, and everything that would be required by a mediation center to function effectively. That process has continued, and it has continued in a big way. As chairperson of the National Legal Services Authority, I can mention it to you that a very sizable section of the budget that we get from the Government of India is spent on setting up of centers wherever they are not available immediately, and in running them, as also in training mediators. When Dr. Shriram Panchu invited me to deliver this keynote address, I expressed my doubts whether I was the right person to do so, exactly for the same reason as Brother Keher mentioned for himself. My diffidence arose out of my not being a mediator, leave alone a trained mediator. But Dr. Panchu insisted and shared some very insightful thoughts with me, provided some notes also to me so that I could reflect on them. And whatever I speak to you today is maybe a reflection of what has transpired between me and Panchu, whom I consider, as I said, is the pioneer of mediation in this country. We have heard of mediations between husband and wife in matrimonial cases. We have heard of mediation in commercial disputes. We have heard of mediation in property, in practically everything. But you would have never have heard of mediation in a dispute between two states over their borders. We tried in the Supreme Court a mediation with the help of Mr. Panchu and one other mediator, Mr. Niranjan Bhatt. Both of them were requested by the Supreme Court to try and evolve some solution of a very vexed kind of a issue that has remained pending in the Supreme Court in two original suits filed by Assam and Arunachal regarding their boundary disputes with Nagaland. They made their efforts. There were times when I had my doubts whether this process is going to lead us anywhere, because a boundary dispute would require marking of the boundary on the ground. And that was a very, very cumbersome process, especially when you are not really sure as to where the boundary lies. There was a dispute even about the genuineness of the maps on the basis of which the boundary would be marked. But what the mediators did, and what was a great achievement, I would say, was that they brought together these factions who were fighting over boundary in the entire northeastern region. The boundaries extends, if I am not mistaken, over something like 800 kilometers in one and another 400 kilometers in the other states. So over a distance of 1200 kilometers, disputes between Assamese on the one side and Nagas on the other, or Assamese on the one side, or Arunachal Pradeshis on the other, or Nagalands and Arunachal Pradeshis were claiming several lives, almost every week, every month. The efforts which they made had a salutary effect on those disputes. Of course, there was a stage when the mediators also felt that it may not be possible for them to mark the boundary, but the effect of those mediation proceedings eventually was that the killing stopped. Incursions from one side to the other stopped. People started listening to the opposite point of view, and people started thinking. And that was a great success. That atmosphere of tolerance and readiness to solve the problems by mediation or by a process of reconciliation was a great achievement. I believe that court-annexed mediation may be new in this country as a tool for resolving disputes, but mediation as such has never been unknown to this country. Who doesn't know that for centuries, for times immemorial, village elders have, under a banyan tree, spoken to two parties who are fighting whether over matrimony or land or property or some other dispute, and tried to bring about a settlement. These panchayats or panchas, as they were called, have resolved matters for centuries. And if you were to go even beyond the recorded history, if you were to go into the mythological era, those of you who belong to this country and are familiar with the Hindu mythology would know that in Mahabharata, Lord Krishna tries to mediate between the factions, Pandavas on the one hand and the Kauravas on the other. He goes to the Kauravas and says, all right, let us settle it. If not the entire realm, at least share a reasonable part of the territory. Give the Pandavas at least 5 villages so that they can lead a life of self-respect and dignity. It failed. And what followed was a disaster. Complete annihilation. 2 lessons can be drawn from that historical or mythological event. One is that even God has preferred mediation to a fight. God Almighty, Lord Krishna in incarnation also thought mediation is a better option. And the second lesson is, don't underestimate or criticize mediation because it does not succeed every time an effort is made. Mediation may succeed, but it may not succeed. For if it doesn't succeed, it doesn't make mediation bad. Because even when God Himself mediates, mediation can fail. If God can fail in His mediation, even an ordinary mediator can also fail. So don't criticize mediation as a non-starter. God Himself prefers mediation, and if He is unable to bring about a solution, mediation doesn't succeed, that doesn't mean that mediation can be rejected. And the third may be that if you do not understand the reason, the logic of the mediator, then the parties can see the disaster that awaits them. These are 3 very important lessons which I would say mythologically can be learned by us from the process of mediation. There are, in my view, 4 stages in the acceptance of mediation, and I would put them in question form. Stage 1, what is mediation? Stage 2, why should mediation be used in this case? Stage 3, why should mediation not be used in this case? And stage 4, why hasn't mediation been tried before the parties came to the court? I think we have crossed stages 1 and 2 in this country. We are now at stage 3, and I hope we shall soon come to stage 4. When I think of the progress, I am reminded of what Frances Brunet said in her book, The Secret Garden, and I quote, "At first, people refuse to believe that a strange new thing can be done. Then they begin to hope it can be done. Then they see it can be done. Then it is done, and all the world wonders why it was not done centuries ago," unquote. You first refuse to believe, then you start believing. And once it is done, then you think, why was it not done earlier? For the litigant, it has the benefits of reduced costs and time. It enables the parties themselves to participate and to work out a practical solution that they consider is the best way to end the dispute. And indeed, the fact that the dispute ends then and there without recourse to appellate layers is a boon to the litigant. It is also of great reassurance that the process is voluntary and largely risk-free. For the court itself, mediation brings advantages. The judiciary in India, it is well known, is plagued with the problem of a tremendous backlog that goes back many years. The fact that so many cases are filed means that people continue to have faith in the justice delivery system. However, for justice to be delivered, it is not just the quality of the judgment, it is also the time and the cost that matters. To use the words of Warren Burger, former Chief Justice of Supreme Court of the United States of America, and I quote, "What we must seek is the most satisfactory, the speediest, and the least expensive means of meeting the legitimate needs of the people in resolving disputes," unquote. If we only depend on judges, we will always have a perennial shortage of resources and manpower. Some time back, we had Professor Mohan Gopal, a very distinguished jurist, discussing with us the court management system that we are experimenting with. He told me that we today have something like 20,000 judges in this country. And if you were to come anywhere near the judge population ratio or the judge case ratio prevalent, let us say, in America or for any other European country, you would require at least 80,000 more judges. Imagine 20,000 already in position and 80,000 more to be created. Now those 80,000 judges, if they have to be appointed, will require 80,000 court halls. They may be in existence, they may have to be, set up. Then the infrastructure required for it, the staff required for it, the revenue expenditure on maintaining those courts, and so on. So if it was dependence entirely on judges, we have a long haul, a difficult job. And therefore, the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms assume greater importance. The fact that so many cases are filed means that people continue. If we only depend on judges, we will always have a perennial shortage of resources and manpower. But we can leverage the large body of potential mediators from amongst lawyers and even from other professions. Given the potential of mediation and its ready acceptance in India across the public, bar and bench, I think that we have a sufficient body of good mediators and make mediation feasible and attractive. It gives us a real opportunity to enhance justice delivery. I use the word real opportunity since mediation, as you know, can be used across a wide spectrum of cases. We can do this in different ways. 1, cases coming up before judges can be referred to mediation. 2, cases long pending can be considered for reference to mediation. 3, as soon as a case is filed, notice of mediation can be sent so that it is attempted in the first instance. And 4, we can popularize out-of-court mediation so that a dispute need not come to court at all. Now, some of these steps are in one form or the other already being experimented. As for instance, I believe in Delhi, when it was, these are 138 cases, I think the summon itself.
In every case.
Huh?
In every case.
In every case, the summon itself says that you can pay and be done with it. There is no need for any appearance or engagement of a lawyer and so on. Now, this is another form. You give him an option straight at the threshold, pay this amount and be done with it. That is one. The other step that was being taken by us was that we were also thinking of providing a court-annexed mediation center where the judge, immediately after the parties appear, let us say in a 138 matter, which is a check bouncing case. For some of you who do not perhaps have an idea what 138 is, 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act makes the dishonor of a check punishable with imprisonment. So there is a large number of cases that are being filed. So the idea was that today a drawer of a check depends on the inadequacy of the legal system to carry that process, the legal process, to logical conclusion within a reasonable time. The person who has issued a check that has been dishonored says, well, I will pay because since the legal process is so inadequate in sending me to jail, even if I have to pay, I will pay 5 years later or 10 years later when I am told that it is time now to go to jail, I will pay and be, you see, out of jail. So that tendency of a litigant who is at fault, but who is depending on either the stupidity of the judge or the inadequacy of the system in not paying up, could be remedied by having a court-annexed mediation center where the judge sends him immediately and tells him, go and settle it. If you do not settle, I will, within next 6 months, be able to conclude this matter and send you to jail. I am sure a litigant, the day he knows that if he doesn't settle, he can as well land up in jail within 6 months, will be more ready to settle rather than a person who knows that in any case the system is so lethargic, so slow, that it will take them 10 years before they can really catch me and threaten me with a jail term. So some of these steps which help in resolving these disputes by mediation, by processes that are akin to mediation, are going to be very useful. You'll excuse me, I have had a very bad throat and chest congestion, partly because of the fungus which the Supreme Court files carry, and partly because of the pollution. Another important area to which we should pay attention is the use of mediation by the government. The government is the largest litigant in the country. For several years now, we have been grappling with the problem of extensive litigation that the government is involved in. And I may pause here. I remember in Kashmir, we had a very eminent chief minister by the name Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah. Most of you may have heard his name. Those from outside the country also would have heard him. When he took over the reins of the administration in 1975, he set up a nucleus within the law department. He said, why is it necessary that we must fight every case in the court? Why can't we set up a system within our own government machinery to decide whether it is a fit case that we ought to contest? And there may be cases where somebody is only simply saying, you have taken my building on rent, you are not paying me rent, please pay me my rent, and he issues a notice under section 80, thereafter a suit comes and you engage a counsel and it goes on. Why? Why should the system not be responsive so as to prevent litigation wherever it can be effectively or logically, rationally prevented? Today I can assure you there is so much litigation in the courts, not because that litigation is really inevitable, but because of the inability or the refusal or the fear of the person concerned in taking a decision. No one is ready to take a decision. So everyone feels, well, this may be the right claim, but why should I take the responsibility for this decision? Tomorrow anyone can raise a finger and say, well, this man agreed to concede this claim for an extraneous consideration. But there has to be a system by which you can, within the government system itself, create a mechanism by which cases do not go for contest in the court. And if they go only after thorough scrutiny, where the government is at no cost ready to concede the claim. And that is precisely what I am mentioning here. Now that mediation has made such strides in our country, it should be realized that it is good method of sorting out intricacy issues between governments and public sector undertakings, and go much beyond to extend to disputes where the government is a party on the one hand and private individuals and entities on the other. Experience has shown that one reason that deters government officials from settling cases is that most settlements involve giving up something for a larger gain. Officials often feel that giving up a part of a claim may lead to investigations and inquiries against them. There is, for that reason alone, a certain amount of reticence towards an amicable settlement by the process of mediation. However, if some mechanism is instituted by which the final clearance for a mediation settlement is given by a high-level committee, and it is mandated that no action will be taken against any officer in respect of such settlement, this may provide an opportunity to the government officers to think of settling cases by which the government could be benefited in terms of money, costs, time, etc. And what is reassuring in this regard is that we are not treading on virgin ground. Experience gained by other countries is in this regard very, very encouraging. Why go to other countries? As I mentioned, in Kashmir, this has been done. The question is the government responsive to the needs of the time? Every case that is filed, regardless of its merits, must be fought in the court and at the cost of the exchequer, burdening the court process, delaying the disposal of other cases that are legitimately filed that need attention is not a good policy. I think this is somewhat, if I may say, this is a deficit in governance. Because governance is not just army, police, roads, buildings. No, governance also, you see, includes adjudication of rights or conceding to the citizen what is legitimately due to him. If you force the litigant, the citizens to go for litigation, it is not good governance. So while a large number of cases coming to the courts is a good sign for the judiciary in the sense that people still have faith in the judiciary and its efficacy, its ability to deal with these matters. A large number of cases against the government may not be good sign, because it shows that within the government there is no mechanism by which you can screen cases that can be contested or ought to be contested and others that need not be contested. For example, UK's Dispute Resolution Commitment 2011 covers contractual disputes with government and general claims brought by citizens and organizations. In UK, they have this system. The process has in 2014 saved taxpayers at least £400 million. Canada has instituted a law practice management division with one of its activities being dispute prevention and resolution, advisory services for the government. Those systems and mechanisms can be studied and see how best can they be introduced in this country with similar methods or mechanisms are better. Not only this will reduce the docket burden, it will enable us to better handle the cases that can only be resolved by the court and which demand its attention, such as cases involving constitutional issues, cases where judicial interpretation of statutes or a direction of court is necessary, cases involving human rights, public interest litigations, cases involving complex issues of law and the like. Today, all these cases are getting into the background. Today, if you ask me, in the Supreme Court, the most powerful court in the country, the most powerful court in the world for that matter, the largest democracy in the world and its most powerful court. If you ask me, do I get any job satisfaction? How much is my job satisfaction if I were to be asked? That I am sitting there for past 5 years, and if you were to ask me, tell us, Justice Thakur, how much is your job satisfaction? I would say, maybe 5%. Why? Because 95% of what I do gives no job satisfaction. This court is not actually meant for anticipatory bail applications to be dealt with. This court is not meant for, you see, suits for partition which are concluded by concurrent findings of two courts below to be, you see, taken to the Supreme Court. This court is not meant for the promotion of a head clerk being taken to the Supreme Court to decide whether it should have been, you see, granted or refused. There are larger issues. There are any number of matters which are today pending before the constitution benches of this court. Any number of cases. By the last reckoning, I believe there were 140 such references which involve very substantial questions of law which will impact the lives of the people in this country and which may help other courts in this country decide cases which are pending. Those cases are awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court because the issue is now pending in the Supreme Court. But we are unable to attend to those important cases. And the whole process is blocked because myself and Brother Kher, Justice Sikri and Justice Sen and Justice Lokur are reading SLP files morning and evening only to decide whether anticipatory bail in a 420 case should have been granted or not granted. Whether this 138 fellow whose 4,000 rupees worth check has been dishonored and convicted should have been sentenced to imprisonment for 3 months or more, and so on. So what I am trying to say is that if we look at it only from the point of view of mediation as between two individuals being cost-effective, speedy and all, that is a very narrow view. Look at it from the point of view of the kind of impact it can have on the efficiency of the judicial system as such. The entire system can get galvanized if you take this extra burden on the judiciary away by a process which is cost-effective, quick, and you see, which does not have those tentacles of an appeal and a further appeal and a revision and so on. You will be doing a great service, I would say, to the cause of justice and to the administration of justice in this country if we were to develop this mechanism of alternative dispute resolution effectively. And that is the whole purpose of this kind of a conference, where you share your experience, you learn from the experience of others. It is not that we are necessarily emulating or copying the West or America, or for that matter, any other country. No, our problem is perhaps much graver. We need it not because we need to fall in line with United Nations or the Americans or the Canadians or the Australians, no. If you have to think about the problems that you are facing with and the solutions, then you would know that, well, this is one of the solutions. And mind you, remember that we are not an Australia. We produce one Australia every year. This is India, 1.25 billion. By 2030, you will be more than 1.50 billion. You will cross China. And imagine if you are 1.5 billion within the next 30 years, and imagine if your rate of literacy is going up, imagine your middle class is prospering, imagine Americans are coming with big, big money bags to invest in India, thanks to our invitation to them. Obama has come, we welcomed him, very happy. Imagine, you see, the whole world seeing India as a big, big, big market because it is a country with 1.5 billion population. Whether it is Pepsi or Coca-Cola or some other company, they think that their business or commercial future lies in this country. Now, in this country, with this kind of population growth, with this kind of explosion in terms of opportunities, in this country, with this kind of awareness and consciousness about rights, do you know, per capita litigation is directly proportional to literacy. The rate of literacy in Kerala is the highest, and you will, if you see the statistics, the per capita litigation in Kerala is the highest in the country. Jharkhand may be a very rich state. It has lots of deposits of coal and other minerals. But because of backwardness, illiteracy, tribal lifestyle, the per capita litigation is very low. The lesson is, the moral of this comparison is that the higher the literacy, the greater the propensity or the inclination to go for litigation, to enforce one's rights. And if there is any deficiency because of any, what you call, economic poverty or anything, NALSA, of which I am the chairman, we have a budget of maybe 700 crores. To do what? To provide a level playing field for a poor litigant as against a rich litigant. We don't want, because of poverty, should a litigant suffer or be deprived of the right to access to justice. And therefore, even when India is growing, literacy is growing, prosperity is growing, awareness is growing, and NALSA is doing its own bit, the number of cases that will come to the courts is going to be phenomenal. And therefore, what will you do? Today, we get 100,000, 1 lakh cases in the Supreme Court of India every year, around that. And we are 30 judges. And there are people who criticize us, but I was only telling my colleagues the best way to silence these critics is please invite them to work with us for at least 15 days. They will know what we are doing. We are, to ask a Supreme Court judge to come and deliver a keynote address after a hard day is cruelty to animals, I would say. I remember Justice Sathashivam was asked to, he was speaking in a book release function, and he made a very honest confession. He said, it's a Friday, and on a Friday you have invited me and I have to speak. If you call a doctor, he will tell you, immediately shift him to ICU in the hospital. Such is our condition. Now what will happen with this kind of population growth, literacy, awareness, prosperity, investments, you see, rights and all? Our filing in the Supreme Court is going to be minimum 5 lakhs within the next 15, 20 years. What will you do? We have a straight formula in India. If your cases go up, appoint more judges. So, are we going to suggest that since pendency has gone up or filing has gone up to 5 lakhs, therefore we must have 150 Supreme Court judges? Today, with only 30 judges, there are 15 Supreme Courts functioning because we sit in divisions, 2 each. And any number of cases, you will find there are such conflicting judgments. You see, there are benches that are taking conflicting decisions on the same issue. There's so much conflict, cleavage in judicial opinion within the court. But imagine if you have 150 Supreme Court judges and 75 benches sitting to decide cases, the kind of confusion that will come in this country will be worst confounded, I would say. I'm only trying to project to you the challenges of the future. Maybe future generation of judges will be better than us, maybe more hardworking, maybe more professional, may be more committed. We are doing our part. We have, brother, Mr. Panchu said, I have spent 21 years as a judge. I feel another 2 years and you may be out of the system. But for anyone to shoulder this kind of responsibility is a very, very tough call, very, very stressful. And therefore, when we look at mediation as an alternative, we should not only think about, well, two parties go home happy. No, that's a very, very, very narrow view of the matter. Not only two parties go home happy, they get justice quickly, but also you are doing a great national service. You are doing a great service to the cause of justice, because you are sparing the judiciary the time to decide with cases that are more important, cases that need to be immediate.